The Revolt of 1857 and the British Raj. The term sepoy refers to an Indian soldier employed by a European power. It entered English via the Portuguese sipi, derived from the Hindustani sipahi, itself from the Persian sipahi, meaning cavalryman. By the 1850s, the company had consolidated its rule over much of India. This led to widespread discontent throughout Indian society. On May 10, 1857, an open rebellion erupted in Meerut. Sepoys, Indian soldiers, in the company's service shot their British officers and marched to Delhi, rallying local troops to their cause. By the evening of May 11, they had declared the aged Bahadur Shah II the Emperor of India, symbolically restoring the Mughals to power and rejecting British rule. The British attitude toward Gandhi was one of mingled admiration, amusement, bewilderment, suspicion, and resentment. Except for a tiny minority of Christian missionaries and radical socialists, the British tended to see him at best as a utopian visionary and at worst as a cunning hypocrite whose professions of friendship for the British race were a mask for subversion of the British Raj. Gandhi was conscious of the existence of that wall of prejudice, and it was part of the strategy of Satyagraha to penetrate it. His three major campaigns in 1920-22, 1930-34, and 1940-42 were well designed to engender that process of self-doubt and questioning that was to undermine the moral defenses of his adversaries and to contribute, together with the objective realities of the post-war world, to producing the grant of dominion status in 1947. The British abdication in India was the first step in the liquidation of the British Empire on the continents of Asia and Africa. Gandhi's image as a rebel and enemy died hard, but, as it had done to the memory of George Washington, Britain, in 1969, the centenary year of Gandhi's birth, erected a statue to his memory. Gandhi had critics in his own country and indeed in his own party. The liberal leaders protested that he was going too fast, the young radicals complained that he was not going fast enough, left-wing politicians alleged that he was not serious about evicting the British or liquidating such vested Indian interests as princes and landlords. The leaders of the Dalits doubted his good faith as a social reformer, and Muslim leaders accused him of partiality to his own community. Research in the second half of the 20th century established Gandhi's role as a great mediator and reconciler. His talents in that direction were applied to conflicts between the older moderate politicians and the young radicals, the political terrorists and the parliamentarians, the urban intelligentsia and the rural masses, the traditionalists and the modernists, the caste Hindus and the Dalits, the Hindus and the Muslims, and the Indians and the British. It was inevitable that Gandhi's role as a political leader should loom larger in the public imagination, but the mainspring of his life lay in religion, not in politics. And religion for him did not mean formalism, dogma, ritual, or sectarianism. What I have been striving and pining to achieve these 30 years, he wrote in his autobiography, is to see God face to face. His deepest strivings were spiritual, but unlike many of his fellow Indians with such aspirations, he did not retire to a cave in the Himalayas to meditate on the absolute. He carried his cave, as he once said, within him. For him truth was not something to be discovered in the privacy of one's personal life, it had to be upheld in the challenging contexts of social and political life. Gandhi won the affection and loyalty of gifted men and women, old and young, with vastly dissimilar talents and temperaments, of Europeans of every religious persuasion, and of Indians of almost every political line. Few of his political colleagues went all the way with him and accepted nonviolence as a creed, fewer still shared his food fads, his interest in mudpacks and nature cure, or his prescription of Brahmacharya, complete renunciation of the pleasures of the flesh. Mohandas, Mahatma Gandhi, postage stamp image of Mohandas, Mahatma Gandhi depicted on a postage stamp from Cyprus. Scholars have continued to judge Gandhi's place in history. He was the catalyst if not the initiator of three of the major revolutions of the 20th century, the movements against colonialism, racism, and violence. He wrote copiously. The collected edition of his writings had reached 100 volumes by the early 21st century. Much of what he wrote was in response to the needs of his co-workers and disciples and the exigencies of the political situation, but on fundamentals he maintained a remarkable consistency, as is evident from the Hind Swaraj, Indian Home Rule, published in South Africa in 1909. The strictures on Western materialism and colonialism, the reservations about industrialism and urbanization, the distrust of the modern state, and the total rejection of violence that was expressed in that book seemed romantic, if not reactionary, to the pre-World War I generation in India and the West, which had not known the shocks of two global wars or experienced the phenomenon of Adolf Hitler and the trauma of the atom bomb. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's objective of promoting a just and egalitarian order at home and non-alignment with military blocs abroad doubtless owed much to Gandhi, but neither he nor his colleagues in the Indian nationalist movement wholly accepted the Gandhian models in politics and economics. In the years since Gandhi's death, his name has been invoked by the organizers of numerous demonstrations and movements. However, with a few outstanding exceptions, such as those of his disciple the land reformer Vinoba Bhave in India and of the civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., in the United States, those movements have been a travesty of the ideas of Gandhi, yet Gandhi will probably never lack champions. Eric H. Erickson, a distinguished American psychoanalyst, in his study of Gandhi senses an affinity between Gandhi's truth and the insights of modern psychology. One of the greatest admirers of Gandhi was Albert Einstein, who saw in Gandhi's nonviolence a possible antidote to the massive violence unleashed by the fission of the atom. And Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish economist, after his survey of the socio-economic problems of the underdeveloped world, pronounced Gandhi, in practically all fields, an enlightened liberal. In a time of deepening crisis in the underdeveloped world, of social malaise in the affluent societies, of the shadow of unbridled technology in the precarious peace of nuclear terror, it seems likely that Gandhi's ideas and techniques will become increasingly relevant. Jawaharlal Nehru delivers his Tryst with Destiny speech at the stroke of midnight on August 14–15, 1947. India and Pakistan became independent nations. Just before midnight, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, delivered a speech entitled, A Tryst with Destiny. Indian independence movement, an anti-colonial struggle spanning approximately a century, aimed at ending British rule over the Indian subcontinent. It ended in a bittersweet victory, as the people of the subcontinent won freedom and independence, yet were painfully divided into two nations, India and Pakistan. Nonetheless, midnight on August 14–15, 1947, was a triumph and a landmark moment in the returning of dignity to the peoples of Asia following the colonial period. The movement was more than political, it was a renaissance, and an inspiration for oppressed nations around the world. Shortly before the stroke of midnight on August 14, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, made a famous speech entitled, A Tryst with Destiny. Long years ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, finds utterance. It is fitting that at this solemn moment we take the pledge of dedication to the service of India and her people and to the still larger cause of humanity. The ambition of the greatest man of our generation, Mahatma Gandhi, has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but so long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. And so we have to labor and to work, and work hard, to give reality to our dreams. Those dreams are for India, but they are also for the world. The British East India Company, painting of an East India Company official. An official of the East India Company in procession surrounded by Indians, a colonial official of the British East India Company moves in a procession on horseback. Watercolor on paper, c. 1825–30. The British first arrived not as conquerors, but as merchants, drawn by India's extraordinary wealth, which had been famous in the West since Greek times. They arrived to find India dominated by the vast Mughal Empire, which had been established in the 16th century by the conqueror Babur and now ruled most of the subcontinent. In 1613, the Mughal Emperor Jahangir granted the British permission to establish a trading post in Surat, Gujarat, which would become the first British foothold in India. Over the following century, the British East India Company established additional trading posts and also gradually increased its economic and political influence throughout the subcontinent. After the death of Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707, the Mughal Empire entered a rapid phase of decline, providing an opening for various regional powers, including the Marathas, the Sikhs, and the northern Rajput chiefs to assert their sovereignty. By the middle of the 18th century, there was no longer a single dominant power in the subcontinent, leaving the region vulnerable to colonial ambition.